Um, I put up there WWJD. Everyone knows what that stands for, right? What would Jesus do? How would Jesus deal with difficult people? And I want you to keep that in mind, because this is not necessarily just a social talk about how to manage difficult people, but it's how to manage myself. Okay? So, first disclaimer. We're going to go through a series of disclaimers or things to help us to understand what the proper mentality is when dealing with anyone and dealing with any situation. So the first disclaimer is always remember that as you believe other people are difficult, perhaps you are the one who's a difficult one. Okay, and you always start with that as your foundation. That I can't just assume that these other people are the difficult people. So I'll read you a parable from, can you guys read that? Yep, it's big enough for everyone to read. So Jesus gives an example. He says, "But what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, 'Son, go work today in my vineyard.' He answered and said, 'I will not.' But afterward he regretted it and went. Then he came to the second and said likewise, and he answered and said, 'I go, sir.' But he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father?" They said to him, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Assuredly I say to you, that tax collectors and harlots enter the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But tax collectors and harlots believed him. And when you saw it, you did not afterward relent and believe him." So Jesus is saying, be careful when you think that other people around you are difficult. Be careful when you think you're the one who's dealing with someone difficult. Look how I have to make concessions for this person. Look the weak they are. Let me compensate for them. Look how annoying they are. Let me deal with them. He's saying, be careful, because I say to you, tax collectors and harlots enter the kingdom of God before you. So be very careful with the concept, because I said, guys, who wants to do a talk on dealing with difficult people? And everyone put their hand up. Yes, I know 5 difficult people that I need help managing. And we have to be careful of that mentality, because perhaps it's me that's difficult. Perhaps it's me. I remember once a friend came to me complaining of this person and that person and that person. And I said, sometimes when everyone around you is difficult, guess who the difficult one is? What's the common denominator of all these difficult people? It's you. It's you. Maybe you're the one that's being difficult. And so the first disclaimer is always remember that my mentality is not that the people around me, and look at the concessions I am making, but remember that perhaps it's me that's being difficult, and change your whole mindset around dealing with other people. The second disclaimer is that if people are difficult, they might be difficult for a reason. Okay, they may be difficult for a reason, and not only that, but sometimes God is quite happy with them being difficult, and he uses their difficult personality for his work. So there's a book, can't remember the name of it. It's by Father Tikhon. It's about Russian monks. Does anyone know it? Everyday Saints. Has anyone read it? It's about young Russian youth who are novice monks that are he writes a story about all the older monks that he's dealt with throughout his as he's growing in as a monk. And so it's a very interesting book, and it's very similar to the Coptic Church. So when you read it, you'll see in it a lot of the things that we see in the Coptic Church. So he just comments on a lot of these elderly monks that he grew up learning from. So there was one of these monks called Father Nathaniel. So I'll just read to you what he says about this Father Nathaniel. "If during the time that I was living there in the monastery, someone had asked me the name of the most difficult person in the monastery, the answer would without a doubt have been only one name: Father Nathaniel, the treasurer," so the guy who held the money. "What's more, this choice would have been made unanimously by all the priests, by all the novices, by all the monks, by all the ordinary civilians, by all the communists from the local administration of the KGB, and even by all the local dissidents." So saying everyone thought this guy was a nightmare to deal with. "He snooped, he spied, he listened in on conversations, and in every way possible he diligently tried to discern whether we were worthy." So he's saying this guy was really hard to deal with. Very, very difficult person, very stingy with the money, busybody, that kind of thing. But he then goes on and says, but the elders saw in him a man of impeccable honesty and remarkably lively intelligence, and had appointed him, even during years of the persecution of the Russian Orthodox Church under Khrushchev, the treasurer and presiding secretary of the monastery, effectively entrusting him with its most valuable secrets. So what he's saying is that personality that was so difficult to deal with, so stingy, so closed, so busybodying, was actually perfect for that role. That difficult personality was perfect for a role in the monastery that no one else had the stamina to do, or the difficulty in personality to manage. So sometimes God uses these personalities for his work. So again, be careful of the way you believe you're dealing with someone, or the way you think about someone who you consider to be difficult, because God uses them in his way. Okay, so that's the second disclaimer. The third disclaimer is, why, if someone is difficult, genuinely, and I have to deal with them, why shouldn't I deal with difficult people if God is dealing with me? And I am so difficult when it comes to dealing with God. When we deal with God, we're like children, like babies. We don't get what we want, we cry, we jump up and down, we don't believe in God all of a sudden. When we get what we want, we forget about him. It's so hard for us to turn to him. It's so hard for us to be disciplined and be obedient with him. You know, we're doing everything we can to annoy God. We're so difficult with God. He works so hard. You read the whole Old Testament, the story of God and humanity is that God keeps doing everything right for humanity, and humanity keeps doing everything wrong by God. And it's this cycle that you go down with God. And we do it individually with him. And so if we're going to be so difficult with God, why shouldn't we tolerate dealing with someone who's difficult with me? C.S. Lewis, he describes his conversion to Christianity. Okay, so he has a moment where he converts to Christianity, and he says, I struggled with it for a long time, and I refused to believe in God. But he says, this is how I had to come to God. He says, I came kicking, struggling, resentful, and darting his eyes in every direction for a chance to escape. You must picture me alone in that room in Magdalene, night after night, feeling, whenever my mind lifted up, even for a second from my work, the steady, unrelenting approach of him whom I so earnestly desired not to meet. That which I greatly feared had at last come upon me. In the Trinity term of 1929, I gave in and admitted that God was God, and knelt down and prayed. Perhaps that night the most dejected and reluctant England. So he's saying that I didn't deal with God, but I couldn't help but admit it. And I did everything I can to struggle against him. How many of us are so difficult with God that we know what to do, we just can't make the sacrifices required? I can't let go of that relationship, or I can't let go of that habit, or I can't let go of that enjoyment that I want. So I'm so difficult, and God's trying with me, and he's pulling me and dragging me, like this guy dragging me. Please, I want to bless you, but I can't. And we're so difficult. And if we really assess our spiritual lives, you'll find that you couldn't be more difficult than the way you are. Yet God deals with us, and he's patient. Even if you sit in your heart of hearts and think about all these difficult people that you're dealing with, and the behaviors that they exhibit towards you, that annoys you, that frustrates you, if you're honest, you'll realize you do those exact same behaviors to God. Tantrums, temper, attention seeking, hounding, hassling, not listening, all the things that disturb you, you'll realize you do to God. Yet God tolerates it. So shouldn't we tolerate it from other people? We should. So remember that we are difficult with God, so don't be so harsh on dealing with other people. The other thing about difficult people is that they might be there for my good. They might be there for my good, or to teach me a lesson. And I'll give you from that same book, Everyday Saints. It's a really interesting book. I really encourage you guys to read it. But in his book, Everyday Saints, he talks about another father called Father Gabriel. Father Gabriel, I think, was the one who was in charge of allowing the novices to enter the monastery. Okay? So he tells this story. about Father Gabriel. He's saying, suddenly this guy came to Father Gabriel. Suddenly an unfamiliar but thick-set and burly young stranger approached, and I heard him beg to be accepted into the monastery. So Father Gabriel said to him, are you willing to take a vow of complete obedience and carry out commands? And he said, of course, Father, any commands at all. And he said, any commands at all? Now Abbot perked up his ears at this. And then the young man said, absolutely, any commands at all. The youngster replied with passion. At that moment, an elderly monk was hobbling past, and the abbot commanded. So this Father Gabriel tells this young, strong guy, as this old man is coming past, says, if you are really ready to carry out any command, walk up to that old man and hit him so hard that he'll fly right out of the monastery. So this young guy, in an instant, the youth flew up to the old man, kicked him so hard that he held several paces forward through the air like a fish trying to leap out of a boat into the water. Then he landed flat on the ground. So this young guy listened to the commandment and went and kicked this old man. Right, and the old man fell. And of course, the point of the story was that the Father Gabriel kicked him out of the monastery. So what are you doing? You can't just kick an old man. You have to at least resist that. So he was there to teach the guy a lesson. So this guy, you'd say, what an irrational commandment. Go kick an old man. So you put this young guy in a difficult position. It's a very difficult person to deal with when it comes to monasticism. However, God used it to discern between whether the guy is suitable for the monastery or not. And they have their own way. And there's so many stories of these young novices going to the monasteries in Egypt, and the same thing, dealing with these, when us as lay people or outside the monastery listen to these stories about what happens in the monastery, we might say, that's irrational, that's crazy, that's just being difficult. But God uses it in His way. He has His own method. So sometimes difficult people are there to teach me a lesson. Abuna Tadros Malati, he when he's talking to priests, he says to them, he says, if you're in a church in a service and there's people around you making the service very hard for you, he said, the last thing you should do is kick them out of the service. Because they're there for your sake. They're there to teach you patience, humility. Maybe they think better than you. Maybe there's another way, a perspective, whatever. But the mentality that in fact it's good for me to deal with people who are not easy for me to deal with, because it can teach me good lessons. So there are 4 disclaimers about dealing with difficult people. And so now I want to talk about how not to deal with difficult people. So what not to do when you're trying to deal with someone that frustrates you. So we're going to read these few verses from Ephesians. So St. Paul says, therefore, putting away lying, let each one of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. So he's saying there, this is how not to deal with people who are one body with you. You don't lie to them just because they're difficult and you don't want to be around them. You don't steal from them. You don't be angry with them and then go to sleep angry with them. You don't use corrupt words against them. That's not what you do. Then he continues, but let all of that be gone from you. Anger, wrath, clamor. Be kind-hearted, be tender, forgive. Because isn't that what Christ did? And Christ dealt with the most difficult people there could be. Think about how he dealt with Judas. There's not a more difficult human being. He gave him every chance under the sun. He entrusted him with the money. Judas stole from the money. Judas came and betrayed him, and still Jesus is just sitting there trying to coax him along in a positive way. Insulted, spat upon, everything you can think of, yet kind-hearted, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. Definitely not swearing, angry, stealing, lying, rejecting, ostracizing, none of that. That's not the way to deal with people, any people. So St. Paul is giving us a clear picture. And the reason why we do all that is he says clearly, you're one body. You're one family. So that's not how you deal with people. How you do deal with them, that's in Corinthians. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I'm going to read that again because he's saying the same thing over and over again in so many different angles to show the patience that love gives a person. When you are patient and you're working towards love towards someone, the level of patience is endless. So I'll read it again. He says, love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil. So it doesn't just imagine evil things about the people next to you. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So the idea that people are too difficult for me to bear is not the epitome of love. When we're working towards a goal of love, there is no limit to what we can deal with. Okay? So that's the goal. We're working towards that goal. Definitely not being rude, shunning, and that's unfortunately a lot of the way we deal with one another because of the negative feelings we have or the frustration that we have towards other people. But it's a misguided way of dealing. And in fact, it just makes the other people more difficult to deal with because they get more insecure, they get more frustrated, they get more agitated, more envious, more whatever it is that's bothering you because of the way that I'm dealing with them. But love absorbs. Love puts out fires. Love settles the personality that deals with me. You know what they say? There's a personality type in medicine that they call a borderline personality. Has anyone heard of it? A borderline personality? It's basically a type of personality that likes to butt heads with everyone. Just banging people here and there. And the second someone's nicer than they just rude back to just so they can get a rise out of people. It's a style of personality. It's called a borderline personality. And they've done heaps of studies on it to try and figure out what's the best way of dealing with a borderline personality. And they said it's very simple. It's a tender, loving relationship. That's it. If they have a tender, loving relationship and they find that they got someone there that they can't agitate, that's it. They settle and they stop being frustrating. So love is the method of dealing with other people in all situations, especially when they're difficult. I don't know what my point is here. I'm just going to read it quickly. Words, anger, and conflict go hand in hand. So in James it says, so then my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So the point here is that if you are at the point where you're at a stage where you're really struggling to deal with someone, then at least then don't talk. Don't talk. If you are struggling to deal with someone in a positive way, don't deal with them in a negative way. Keep quiet. So what he's saying, St. James is saying, that every man be swift to hear, but slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So when you think you're dealing in a righteous way with someone who's difficult, in fact, you're not producing the righteousness of God. So talk less and try not to be angry, and don't express those feelings of resentment and anger towards other people. Yeah. So if I'm in a situation where I'm really struggling to deal with someone and I can't seem to have positive feelings, what we're doing is we're working towards love. We're working towards that goal of loving, absorbing, and dealing with in a positive way. While I'm struggling with that, yes, there's two things that I should be doing. If I really can't deal with someone, and I have the choice, because sometimes it's within my family, for example, it's not a choice and I have to manage it. But if it's not in my family and I don't have to manage it, then I can keep my distance, yes. But that's a secondary solution. The primary solution, which we haven't talked about at this stage, is actually praying for them. Because it's something that we never do, especially when I get really frustrated with someone. I never pray for them. But understand that any behavior coming from another person that disturbs me is coming from a disturbed place in them. If they're insulting me, for example, why would they feel the need to insult me? Perhaps it's they feel the need to make someone laugh as an insecurity. Perhaps they're deflecting frustration in themselves on me. Perhaps there's a million other reasons why it could be the case. So I should pray that God, you will take away that feeling in them that leads them to deal with me in this way. Or if they're dealing with me in a really frustrating way because they're envious of me. For some reason, they have the feeling of envy towards me. Well, that they start dealing with me in a really, really annoying way. And it's hard for me to deal with them. Well, God, whatever it is that they're envious with me about, give them success in that. Let them have success. Let them have peace. God, would you let them pass that exam? Would you let them have a good, loving relationship? Would you, God, let them have good friendships around them? Let them have success in what they're doing, because that will settle them. So that feeling of love grows through prayer. When I start to, we can't get along, I keep my distance. But it's not out of hatred. It's not out of anger. It's not out of resentment and spite and wishing bad on other people. That's wrong. And that means God is not there. God is not with me. So, I was reading Joshua, because on Monday we're doing the Bible study on Joshua. And there was a commentary on chapter 5, which I'm not doing, but I'll just comment on it anyway. Joshua is standing there about to go to war. And the angel of the Lord appears to Joshua, who's actually Christ. There's an image of Christ in the Old Testament. And then Joshua says to him, he doesn't know who he is, and he says to him, are you with us or for our enemies? And the man of God answers, neither. I'm not with any of you. I am the commander of the army of the Lord. And so Joshua bows down and worships him. And you think, what sort of answer is that? Are you with me or not? And in the end, the commander of the army of the Lord actually helps Israel. But why did he say neither of you? Because what he wants you to understand is that God is, it's am I with God, not is God with me? Am I with God? God has a task in the world. God has to deal with everyone. Am I with him or not? So when we start getting frustrated and angry with other people, we're asking God, well, I'm the righteous one and he's not, or she's not. And that's God's looking and saying, I'm not with either of you. That's nonsense. Are you with me? All right, if you're with me, then you love them. Then you pray for them. Then you look after them. Yeah. Wickedness. So, did anyone see the message of Buna Paula sent around this week with the plank in the eye? Did you see it? I don't know which WhatsApp group it went in, but it's a really gory picture of this big plank in someone's eye, and he's pointing out this little speck in someone's eye. Look, I think we have to be careful of calling other people wicked. In general terms, as I said before, with all the disclaimers, we have to be careful of calling other people wicked. However, as Christians, we're taught a certain way of living. Okay, we're taught a certain moral code. Okay, that we know. It's not unclear to us. It's not unclear to us about sexual immorality. It's not unclear to us about drunkenness. It's not unclear to us about selfishness. It's not unclear. We make choices that against that, but the vision, the morality is clear. So when I see other people going down a pathway where that doesn't matter to them, so they're just lying and it's easy for them to lie, or drunkenness is something simple for them, or sexual immorality is very easy for them, then yes, I wouldn't call them wicked. I wouldn't say they're evil, because that's up to God to judge them or not. But yes, I can stay away from certain groups or behaviors because I know that those behaviors, they can take me with them because they're so alluring and tempting and easy for me to follow. And plus, I have a hard time struggling against it anyway. So let me just stay away from that. So that's very different to just saying they're a difficult person for me to manage. I just don't like them. I'm talking more about the idea of just not liking certain types of people. When we're dealing with, when it comes to dealing with people that their moral code is different to mine, and I struggle because I can't be with them without making that mistake, and the reality is, as humans, you can't be around people that are always making a mistake and not make the same mistake. You just can't. So we stay away. That's a different choice. That's a very different choice, and that's a proper choice. That I try and choose people around me that are going down the same pathway as me, or at least what I would like to be. Whereas if I'm constantly around people with a different moral code, I'm going to struggle. So we don't call them wicked. That's up to God. But yes, we have to make clear choices as youth. At your stage of life, there's nothing more important than making that choice. That I stay away from certain events, certain people, certain groups, not because they're bad, but because that's not the pathway that I'm choosing. I'm choosing a pathway to heaven. And so when I have to choose that pathway, then it takes courage. It takes a lot of hard choices. Does that help answer the question? This one?
So what happens when someone calls you out saying, "Oh, I feel you don't like me"?
So someone comes to you and says, "Why are you being not nice to me?" kind of thing. Okay. We have to be gentle. Like, look, you have to be sensitive to other people. So be harsh on yourself. Always, this is a rule in life. Be harsh on yourself, right? But gentle on others. So if someone is coming to me and they feel that I'm not dealing with them in a nice way, then it's time for me to reflect. Why is it that they feel that way? Perhaps I wasn't being nice. Or perhaps I was being insensitive to other people's sensitivities. So perhaps I'm not a sensitive person, but other people are. So I have to be careful of that when I deal with them. Now, of course, some people can be very, very sensitive and it's hard for me to manage. And there's a balance and there's a walk to take. But I just be gentle. Like if someone is struggling in that way and thinks that I'm not dealing with them, then just be gentle. I didn't mean it. We have to learn to apologize or say, look, I didn't mean it, and I will try and adjust the way that I deal with you. And it's a point of reflection for me. So I think it's just being gentle as if it's my brother. If my brother comes to me and says something like that to me, how would I deal with it? I'd be gentle. I'd be, I didn't know that's how you feel towards me. Not, what do you mean? I didn't mean it. How come you're saying that and you're being so sensitive and attacking them? Of course, if I'm the one that I feel that people are not dealing with me nicely and I want to go talk to someone about it, again, there's a method of doing that. I don't go and accuse and attack. I have to be solution focused, not problem focused. Sometimes when we go to tell someone that I'm bothered by what they did, I attack them. I say, you offended me and you insulted me. But the person didn't mean it. So I should say, I felt insulted. It's a much better way of saying it because the person themselves didn't mean it. And so when you come and attack them, they go on the defensive and they defend their actions. When if you just say, look, I felt insulted when you said that or you spoke like that. I felt humiliated. The person says, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to humiliate you. I'll adjust the way I do that. I will not talk like that. I'll try to readjust. So it's about how you do it, how you interact with one another. Again, as if it's my brother or my children or my sister or my parents. The way you deal with them is done in love. I trust the emotion being directed towards me. Again, that's what he said here. He says, love bears all things, believes all things, trusts all things. You trust the emotion of the people that you're dealing with. You don't automatically assume that they're wicked and they're going to cause me harm and they're going to steal from me and they're going to... No, we trust one another. That helps us deal with each other positively. Does that help answer the question? So that's it. I don't have any more slides. Does anyone have any more questions or comments they would like to add? Mario.
What would Jesus do? Because
Yeah.
Jesus was God. Come on, like, we cannot just like.
Yeah, but I think that the idea behind it is that that Jesus is a model. He showed us the way of salvation or the ways of salvation. So yeah, we use him as a model. And I think it's okay. If you don't like the expression, don't use it, but we do use him as a model. Any other questions? Yeah.
Bible. It says, if someone asks something of you, you give to them. What if they're so difficult that you can no longer, like, you don't want to give anything to them?
Look, in terms of like, because this happens a lot, for example, in carers, people that are dealing with people who are unwell and they get, like, for example, anyone who's dealt with someone who has dementia or something like that, or an illness that affects the mind, the people that they're dealing with can be very agitated and it's very thankless. They're giving up everything for this person and still they're just being attacked. I've seen it many times. And it becomes very hard, and the level of stress can go up to the point where I struggle to provide the service. That's true. So we have to look after ourselves in that way. So if I'm trying to help someone and it's thankless and it's difficult and hard to manage, yeah, I can keep my distance. I'm entitled to keep my distance or to look after myself in that way. Again, the proviso is, one, that I pray. Two, that it's not done in hatred and anger and frustration. That's key, because then my soul is getting destroyed in the process. In the end, I'm the one that's going to be judged by God, not the other person. So I have to look after myself in the sense of I continue to love, I continue to pray, I continue to have positive feelings. If I'm struggling, I keep praying about it until God gives me the strength. But in the meantime, I'm entitled to keep my distance. Yes. God bless you guys. Thank you so much for having me. I know I'm not a bishop, but I did the best I can in the time that I had. I hope you have a wonderful night. There is another theme that I'd like to suggest to Andrew at some stage for the youth meeting, which is going back to basic Christian morals. So we'll do a theme on the basic Christian morality. Just the general back to basics, first principles of Christianity, what it is that is expected from us, from God, in a basic moral sense, in terms of purity, alcohol, drugs, general ways of behaving. So at some stage, hopefully we'll do a series like that. Another thing I'd love to do as well at some stage is to do a talk about proper behavior on social media, because social media is a new platform or a new social community, basically, where the rules seem undefined and people's behaviors are not the same as the way they would behave in real life. Yet at the same time, it's a public space. So everyone observes what you do on social media, everyone. You can't hide it. Once it's on the internet, it's there forever. And so I think we need to think deeply about the way we behave on social media as a group of youth, as a group of Christian youth, to try and readjust the way we think about social media. Because in the past, everyone was a private individual, and when I wanted something to be public, I'd come and do it in front of everyone. Now, everything you do is public. Everything you do, you're all politicians. You're all public figures. So you have to be very careful about the way you interact on social media, whether you're a servant or not, whether you serve God or not. So that's another thing I think we should talk about in a bit more detail at some stage, if Andrew will allow us. That will include some of that stuff into the programs. If you guys have anything else on your minds, then let us know anytime and we'll add them in, and we'll try and address anything you guys have on your minds.